Hi YouTube, Ben here from Sonic Safari. Today we're going to continue on our adventures in drum sound design using the ES2 synthesizer in Logic, and we're going to create a tom sound, so let's get into it. Okay, here we are inside of Logic with the ES2 synthesizer. Again, I'm starting on this preset tutorial settings, analog saw inish, so we've got just a sawtooth wave. We're going to be creating a tom sound here, so I'm going to start with something fairly simple, a sine wave. Okay, now again, a big part of this is the envelope. So a couple of things I'll do here, make this a monophonic instrument so we can't play chords. Otherwise, we get that. So just one note, mono, and I'll set this to hard oscillator start. So it's always going to start at the start of the waveform. And let's shape this envelope. So envelope 3 by default, if you've been watching along in my series, is routed to the amplitude. So let's bring the sustain down. Pretty much any percussive sound dies out, so we want to turn down the sustain. And I'll bring that decay down a bit. I'll actually leave this release fairly long at about 15 milliseconds. We can play with that later. So again, if we want to have a sort of typical tom sound, electronic tom sound has got that sort of pitch attack. So what I'll do is come here, and I've already got in the modulation matrix this one here that's targeting pitch 1, 2, 3. And what I might do is set this to, say, envelope 1. We don't want that via the mod wheel, so I'll set that to off. And if we increase this amount, let's have a listen. So now we're using envelope 1 to do a little pitch bend there at the start. And we've used the similar trick before with our snare drum and our kick drum, and generally you'd have a much snappier sort of decay. But for a tom, we might want a slightly longer decay. So somewhere around here, about 170 to 200 milliseconds. And just play with the amount there. Now if you go too high, you get this sort of zappy sounds like disco toms, which is not quite what I'm going for. So bring this down a little bit. And what I might also do is, depends what pitch I play it at. I'm going to play it round about here, round about G, G2. So I might want to pitch this down a bit. I'll grab the oscillator and pitch this down. Maybe on a fairly low one. I'll go down -12. Let's just see how low that is frequency-wise. That is quite low, but maybe we'll play with the pitch a bit later on. Okay, so we've got the sound pitching down, and that's just sort of standard kind of sounding tom. However, what I might want to do is just add a little bit more, I don't know, interest to the sound. I'm going to turn on oscillator number 2, and let's set this to, actually let's frequency modulate oscillator 1 to oscillator 2. So I'm actually going to turn this from a sine wave here on oscillator 1 to this sine wave here, and we can choose how much frequency modulation we want oscillator 2 to affect oscillator 1. So there we go. And now we're getting a bit more body out of the sound. So even just a little bit there of frequency modulation. And you notice that oscillator number 2 here is set to a square wave. Which I'm quite happy with. And notice that the pitch of oscillator 2 has a big effect on oscillator 1. I'm actually going to keep it there at about just 0 pitch. Okay, that's starting to sound a bit more tom-like. Now, what I might do is come to the filter. Maybe let's just bring that filter cutoff down a bit. There we go. I'll set this to fat mode. And what I might do is use an envelope to control that. In fact, already envelope 2 is controlling the filter cutoff 2, which is what I want. So that's giving me this sort of quite hard techno kind of a sounding tom. That's kind of what I'm going for. So we could add a bit of distortion. Let's see how that's going to sound. You know what? It's already sounding quite distorted already with that FM going on. So I'm not going to bother distorting it. Let's maybe take off some of the low end here. What I could do is just add an EQ, or filter out just the really low frequencies here. Let's add a bit of reverb. This needs a bit of reverb for sure. So I'm going to come here and add a space designer. And I was quite liking this medium space under rooms, this percussion room. Way too much. Maybe I'll shorten the length. Don't mind quite a lot of reverb on this one. And I might come to the output EQ. Let's cut a little bit of bass out there. And this is just out of the reverb. And also while we're at it, we'll cut out some treble. Actually, no, I'll leave the treble in. Can play with the release here a bit. So you could even use the same sort of a sound for more of a hard kick drum sound. But something like that's pretty good for a tom. So. So there is our simple electronic techno tom sound. In the next tutorial, let's see if we can put this all together into a drum kit. See you then.